Good morning, world. This is Steve Rao on Pod TV's World Edition. And on World Edition, we bring you great news from around the world, talk about innovation, and also discuss what we can do as a nation and world to build back better and stronger from the COVID pandemic. Last night, President Joseph R. Biden addressed a TNN town hall, his first one in a few months. It was very clearly a frustrated, tired president, one who came into Washington and the White House with goals of bipartisanship. But it clearly seems that these bipartisanship visions or utopia seem to be waning every day for this president on the job. Biden, first of all, talked about the vaccination challenges in the United States, the fact that many are not being vaccinated. And with the rise in the Delta variant, he actually said that the pandemic is not over for those that are unvaccinated. He didn't really seem to have an answer other than he's going to continue with his national vaccine campaigns, but he reiterated how important it was. He looked frustrated at his inability to pass an infrastructure plan. Time and time again, he's been putting this before the Senate and the Congress. And every time, the Republicans are doing what they can to block the infrastructure bill. He says that prices may continue to rise and there could be inflation. And all of his efforts have been so far on the COVID pandemic. This president also faces challenges in Haiti, Cuba, and let alone Russia and China, which wasn't really talked about last night. But I do see that he's got a number of different battles to face. At the end of the day, he said he still wants to work with Republicans, but he criticized them for lying sometimes and not working with them in good faith to move the country forward. We say all of this as I close my monologue, and that what do the American people want? I think they want to be healthier. They want this pandemic over. They want businesses opening up, and they want this pandemic behind us. And it won't go away if we don't get rid of the Delta variant in other countries, with millions of cases still in India and now Indonesia taking over as the number one place for COVID 19. As Anita Gorman said, America is not just a pride we inherit, it's the past that we step into and repair it. Let us only hope that President Biden can convince his Republican colleagues, Senator McConnell, Representative Kevin McCarthy, that we have a duty to repair and rebuild our nation. We must do it not as Democrats and Republicans, but as Americans. We wish you well, Mr. President. We know it's a tough fight, but we're still hoping for the best as you lead us as our Commander in Chief. With us today, we have Mark Lee and our distinguished panel. I didn't even get to really practice that monologue, but I'm reading so much about the news, and it looked like he looked very presidential last night, but very frustrated. More of a tone of, I don't know what's going on here, right?
Mhm.
I feel bad for him because he made such strides with getting us vaccinated, and then all of a sudden things have halted. Coronavirus is picking up in other states, and it looks tough out there, right?
It looks very tough. I mean, some people are making some interesting comments and everything, apparently, and I've got to read more on the article, but apparently the governor of California has invited the homeless to come to his state and everything. So apparently Gavin Newsom has actually said that he is welcoming folks from around the country to come if they are in part of that homeless population. And of course, it's very hot out there and there are wildfires. So I don't even know that if I was homeless, I would want to go there and all of that. But I did see that article was there where he had invited the homeless to come to his area, and it'll be interesting to see how that plays out. And of course, folks are getting more tired of the whole vaccination fights and all of that. So definitely, I mean, we just saw 2 days ago the basketball championship, and there was a whole lot of people out there that were not wearing masks and they were partying and all of that. So it'll be interesting to see whether we do see spikes. And I know that there are being continuing numbers going up, but right now, like you said, the president is trying to keep the vaccinations coming and rising so that we can truly put this behind us. But it's going to take a time. It's going to take a minute and all of that. We're
Yeah.
joined today by a friend of ours from New Zealand. So Rakesh has joined us from New Zealand. And we're glad that he's coming here, and maybe he's going
Well,
to share wisdom from New Zealand as well. So, how are things going there in New Zealand? How's everything going down there?
it's
And what are some
excellent.
of your thoughts about, how we're handling things, not just here in the United States, but worldwide when it comes to both the pandemic and climate change? Because I know that you oftentimes have great opinions about these, and I'd love to hear your thoughts. And by the way, yesterday, Steve invited somebody onto the show that was about smart cities, and it's the people from Riot. And I know that you've been also involved in smart city initiatives as well. So I'd love to hear some of your thoughts about those issues as we continue to examine the news.
Yes, and Vacation, it's great to see you. There's a cricketer from New Zealand who actually is a pro player that was in Morrisville just last week. Corey Anderson. Do you
Hmm.
know? Yeah, he was here as a pro player, so it was great to see him.
Okay.
Yeah. But it's so good to see you, Rakesh. And so, tell us real quickly about before you answer Mark's question. We were just talking about in my monologue, sort of like President Biden addressed the nation in a town hall yesterday, and it seems like his commitment or utopian vision of bipartisanship just isn't happening. In terms of just Republicans stalling them on everything, vaccinations going down, well, not going down, but not really going up from where it is, and the Delta variant, which is becoming more contagious. 83% of all cases in the U.S. I don't know how it's in New Zealand. So he's projecting inflation. This clearly is a president that doesn't is not cautious about sharing bad news. So he said that inflation could be on its way, price increases, labor shortages in businesses. All of these things are existent. And what are your thoughts about what this president's dealing with?
Well, first of all, here in New Zealand, we don't have any crisis in terms of COVID because the borders are very strictly controlled. So we're okay. If we travel by public transport, we have to put a mask, and that's about it. In the malls and things like that, there's no insistence on masks, and we don't seem to. Even our vaccine program is a bit slow. We are building up reserves of vaccines, 500,000 doses, and I'm supposed to be informed by my general practitioner that the vaccines are due now, come and have it, and I plan to take it, but no news. So the opposition is grumbling, saying that there's no news of the vaccine, and but some people, I have an older friend who's about 70 years old, and he's had his vaccine with his wife. So it's sort of inching along, the vaccination program, but people are willing to take the vaccine. It's just that it's not available.
Yes,
In terms of President Biden, I think he's telling the truth. It's I think it's a bit about managing expectations. You sort of if it is the fact is that infrastructure. I haven't been to the States for a long time, I must confess, but I hear that infrastructure is really down. So you've got to rebuild it if you have to have an economy which has to compete with a very agile competitor like China, who's constantly, even yet, building infrastructure. You see, so I think he's telling the truth. He's telling it like it is, and for I think the population needs to look at seriously understanding the threat that they face. The threat is not in terms of military threat or economic threat. I think that is not an issue. The issue is that you're facing a competitor who is growing, very, very rapidly, and whose influence is so much that they're challenging your dominance.
yes,
So
yeah, exactly.
that is something you have to recognize. The people of America have to recognize that, and there's some things that America needs to do. It's got to be efficient. I don't mean it in a disrespectful way. You have to have your 1 month holiday, which America doesn't have. And saying the United Nations, the World, International Labor Organization recommended that based on efficiencies that arise thereof. And somehow it is quite sad that a democracy of more than 400 years hasn't realized it. So, and a democracy that houses the UN in so many ways. So that is quite tragic. I think not just the Americans, people like Bezos and all the multi-billionaires and maybe trillionaires have got to realize it too, and concentration of economic power in such a manner is very unhealthy. I'm a capitalist. I'm a businessman myself, but it's got to be. We've got to eventually develop that middle class. Why do people even look at India today with all the chaos that Modi is doing? They look at India because it still has a middle class. They look at China because it still has a middle class, not because of the billionaires. That lesson has to be firmly underlined, highlighted, whatever. If President Biden is saying that, I would find it hard to fault him for that. Now stop here or listen to what your thoughts are.
No, that's very interesting points that you bring up, Rakesh. And by the way, here in North Carolina, we are also required to wear masks as well on the public transportation. So that is something that is going on regularly. As a matter of fact, I went to go visit our friend and a colleague, Zach, and I actually still had my mask on, and he was actually surprised at that. But I literally just come off of the bus, so that's the reason that I still had it on and everything, because there are still certain places, including some of the restaurants and definitely on mass transit, that the mask is required. So you're absolutely right about that, and we are seeing that here. I did want to bring Sasha Starr into the conversation as well. He is, of course, our master chess player and, of course, a great investor doing some amazing things in the stock market and all of that. One of the things that I had mentioned, and I'd love to hear folks' thoughts about this, but I mentioned it just briefly after Steve had his kind of monologue and everything, was that our governor in California, the governor of that particular state, has pledged to house and feed the world's homeless population, doing a whirlwind Comeback California tour that is designed for him to stave off a September recall by angry voters. So, the Golden State is already cracking under the weight of the nation's largest homeless populations and one of the worst economic climates post COVID-19. Even though I don't think that we can call it post COVID-19, because as Steve just said, there's still a lot of folks that are not being vaccinated, and even to come to the whole thing of prices. Gasoline apparently there is pushing $5 a gallon, and 18 million homeless back into all the blue cities, and dilapidated freeways there are strewn with trash. So I'm actually surprised that he would say that he wants to invite more people when it seems like it's already a crisis going on there. That almost seems like political suicide to me for him to come out with that statement. And I know that you sometimes follow politics and just kind of like follow what people are saying. So Sasha, what do you say? What do you say when somebody that is supposedly running for office comes out with a statement like that?
Well, if he's coming with a statement like that, he believes that it's to his benefits. And then if that's correct, then he's doing a great job. Now, if he believes so, but in fact it doesn't provide any benefits to him, then he's probably, should I say, a stupid man, or near stupid, or very stupid. It's hard to say. You have to qualify yourself. And but it's if you're talking about global politics, I don't think it's really such big news even to discuss.
Yes. Hey, Steve, what do you say as somebody that's been in that political space? So I'm sometimes surprised when politicians make statements like that, and I try to figure out what their political game is. And you just talked about the press conference, and one thing I've always appreciated about Biden is, as Rakesh said, he is very straightforward. He just comes out with the facts, and we have to deal with them in the best way possible, because I don't think that he sugarcoats much, and that may just be coming from that position of being a senior statesman as well, because he's always been throughout his life in politics, having that kind of senior statesman kind of role, and definitely in the the latter part of his political career and everything with the now presidency. But I was just wondering, because like I said, I was just surprised as I was scumming through news to see that statement. And I've heard other kind of statements like that from New York politicians and others where you're sitting there going like, trying to understand where they're coming from. We can even look at corporate America, because I know that Ben and Jerry's recently came out where they wanted to boycott part of Israel, but not all of Israel. So if you're going to do a boycott, shouldn't you boycott the entire country? Because a partial boycott seems to not be effective in my mind, but maybe they know something that I don't. But as one that's been in that landscape, what is your thoughts about how some of these politicians are trying to navigate?
Well, you actually, I'm going to do a precursor to my closing monologue, because I have some ideas just based on my own experience of what's happening. So without ruining it for everybody that's going to join at the end, I would say that the biggest problem I see with politics is that it's just really become a zero-sum game. It's winner take all, and there's no incentive to compromise, number one. So, I think the biggest thing in American politics today is the amount of money that's involved. So in 2001, there was only about $8 million spent on federal elections, or $1 billion. And today that's about well, actually, it was $1 billion. And before the last election, it was 14 billion in federal elections. And with Citizens United, for those of you listening, which was the Supreme Court decision that said corporations get unlimited money, what happens is that every 2 years you run for office in Congress, every 6 years in the Senate, and you line up and you basically pledge your support to those that supported you, and to win the primary, to win the election. And so there's no incentive to work with the other side. I mean, the other problem is gerrymandering. So the system is designed, when you put the party in power to draw the legislative districts, there are people that say, well, I don't have to talk to the other side. I have no incentive to talk to the other side. And I've spoken to Senator Jay Chaudhary before in North Carolina, who is in a very safe district in the Democratic Party. But he says one thing that he thinks would be good, even for his own seat, he would like to have competition, because he said it would force him to go knock on Republican doors, learn about those ideas, and then have a conversation. But when they go into the state Senate, there's just a line in the sand. You have 14 Democrats, 35 Republicans, and they're already predetermined. That's it. So I hope that answers your question.
That did, and it looked like Rakesh had his hand up, so I was actually going to toss it to him.
I think this is, what you just described is symptomatic of the problem of perspective amongst the people who run the country. They are still looking at internal enemies rather than seeing the external enemy. If the country has to run, it has also, Democrat and Republican, also to function as a team. If they're just going to be rabidly opposed to the opposite side, then you have a house divided. And that is probably the reason America is having so much difficulty competing with nations like China or even Europe, because the perspective, the American politician still thinks that we're, king of the mountain, and that's never going to change. No, it will change if they do not fix it. And that is something which I'm not criticizing the politicians. It's just a change of perspective. It's only human for them to think that way, but it is something which needs to be fixed. And as long as you look at it as, the domestic arena and the global perspective is forgotten, then we will have this problem.
Now, that makes sense. It looks like Steve was having something going on at his house, but we'll try to find out what that is and everything. But one of the things I was going to ask you, Rakesh, is I've always heard good things about the way that your country has been handling climate issues and things of that nature. So I just wondered if you could speak on that, because definitely it seems like y'all have a very effective leader, and definitely I know that climate control is something that the world in general is concerned about, not just the pandemic, but we're also seeing raging fires throughout the world, not just in the United States and Canada, but I think there was even one in China and some of the other places that exist as well. So from a climate standpoint, I was just wondering, and I know that you got that science background and a big proponent of science education, if you could talk a little bit about what's happening in your country and in that part of the world in that regards.
Certainly, we'll be happy to talk about that. We are not facing huge issues of climate, but we are, because we exist in the world, and even if other countries do something which is not quite right, we suffer too. We're small, about half the size or 1/3 the size of France. Not really big, not a really big country in terms of land area, but we're doing. The government has an incentive for people who go for electric cars. They subsidize the price by a certain amount. They do that also for plug-in hybrids, because you have the normal hybrids, which I happen to have, and then you have the plug-in hybrids, which are more electric in their nature. And the government gives quite a substantial, almost I would say around 5 to 7% discount. They give you a cash repayment of so that you can buy those cars. That's one thing, and then they are of course working on introducing more electric buses, and the trains are already electric. They used to be diesel, so they're doing that kind of thing. From a global perspective, inland, China is suffering deep in the heart of China, in deep inland. They are facing in Henan province huge amounts of rainfall. The whole year's rainfall in 3 days. People dying, getting drowned in their metro railways. The same thing is happening in India. Delhi, which is far away from any coast, is also having tremendous rainfall. Mumbai, where my sisters live, tremendous rainfall. And I think that people who think that only coastal areas are going to be submerged are mistaken. You're going to have people dying. Germany, which is really doesn't even have a serious port, 170 dead at a minimum, and Belgium, which has a port, is also suffering. Austria, landlocked, suffering. So it's not that anybody is going to have an easy way out of climate change. Everybody's going to be affected, and we're having heavier than normal rainfalls. Warmer than normal. Winters. So this thing is, there is no doubt that there is climate change. The only question is how much will it hit all of us, and what is the cause, and how do we address it? Jacinda Ardern is a younger politician, so she is concerned. She has more of the future to worry about than a person like me who's already 60. So I can see she has a young child. She has future is staring at her in the face. So she has to take steps to do something. Unfortunately, we're a very, very small economy. Our GDP is just only about 200 and something billion, while even Singapore or Hong Kong has a bigger economy than us. So countries like India, China, USA, and Europe need to fix their approach to and I think the biggest way to do that is to start by electrifying transport.
Yes, absolutely.
No, that makes a lot of sense. Steve, it looks like you were having some things going on.
Yeah, I've got some. I'm taking care of my mother today, so I'm going to be in and out. She's having some issues today, so I apologize. So I'm going to be in and out. And I tell you, the COVID pandemic, I mean, it may be just for you, those of you watching, work life has returned to complete normal. So all virtual meetings have ended. All meetings are required in person. So we're actually being required to go to the office now. I negotiated just 2 days a week, but apparently by the fall it's going to be 5 days a week. So got to get back in the car and drive to work every day and come back. So a bit of a life change after 15 months of Zoom meetings.
I might add one thing that, when it comes to using transport, in New Zealand, we are not insisting on that. In fact, flexi timing is now the norm. People are not insisting that you come in unless you are linked with a factory function. My wife, unfortunately, is in quality, so she has to travel to the factory, and she's in charge of 2 factories. So she goes to different factories at different times, and you can't go to both factories on the same day because you have a site restriction, again, because of COVID. So these are the things that I think it's too early to insist that people come back, because you're just going to add to that much of emissions. I think it would be probably good to take a hard look at roles. And because New Zealand is a small country, I know it's difficult in a large country like the US or China, but they're taking a hard look at roles, and only those who need to come in are asked to come in.
That makes a lot of sense. Hey, Sasha, how are things going in terms of getting back to work from what you're hearing from Canada? I know that y'all are still very much in that lockdown stage, and of course, you've got the benefit of a lot of your work is from home and everything, but you are also having associates and people in your family that are part of the work environment. So are they like Steve? Are many of them not doing as much virtual and going back into the offices from what you're hearing? And by the way, both Rakesh and Sasha, y'all might be in the above 50 crowd, but I've already decided that y'all are going to live to be about 150 anyway. So y'all will be here anyway for a long time and all of that. So Sasha, what is your thoughts about the way that work is coming back?
It's coming back. Some people are already commuting to work. Some people are on remote situation. And it varies from company to company. And I know that that's really what it is. But slowly coming to normal. People are very cautious. Vaccinated rate, vaccination in Canada is very high, probably the highest in the world. And so there will be probably a 3rd or 4th or 5th wave, or some 15th wave or 25th wave. And you have to accept it. It's probably going to stay here for a while. And so you have to mitigate. And from what I see, that the vaccinated people are much less likely to die from this infection. So they may not even have to go to the hospital in most cases. Probably they will have a couple of days high fever, maybe some uncomfortable other stuff. But so basically the people are being vaccinated. There are some in Toronto, we have some centers which are open 24 hours a day, and they're taking all comers, even without OHIP, which is Ontario Health Insurance Plan. So you can come in, just probably only thing what you have to say is your name, and you will get your shot.
I have a friend who lives in Indonesia, and Java and Sumatra seem to be very badly affected by COVID. Same problem as in India. No oxygen, no beds, and people dying. Children dying of COVID, little babies. So I've sort of become numbed to the all these variants and things like that. So I know the Delta variant is there, but within the Delta variant, there are so many other variants, sub-variants, which are worse and affecting children and things like that. My soul has become numbed to this. I find it hard to to focus. I get depressed when I think about it.
Rakesh, but tell me, children who are dying from COVID, they're getting it from their parents because how else they can get it? So they're
Yes,
getting
from the parents. I saw a video of a young Indonesian mother whose baby was suffering from COVID, and I don't know what happened, but her baby was suffering from COVID, and she said that she was hopeful of it surviving, but it was a little infant. It wasn't not even something that can walk around. I mean, where can it get the infection from? It cannot even move. And it was just normally at that age, when it was breastfeeding, they have very high immunity normally at that age, and still it was they were suffering. And my friend who lives in Bali, which is not that badly affected, lesser population density. So they are okay, but Java and Sumatra, where the density is high, a lot of problems. Papua New Guinea is having problems, so Australia and China both have come to their aid, giving vaccines. I think eventually we will have to look at every country looking at a strategic production of vaccines within the country, and keeping a facility within the country, at least to cater to the country's population. Because they're having globalization has actually disadvantaged countries, and both supplier as well as supplied to. India is, where the biggest vaccine manufacturers are. They are struggling, while you see nations like China and Russia, who have their indigenous vaccines, are doing reasonably well. In fact, in terms of efficacy, the Sputnik vaccine, at least that's what information we get here, as well as from India. My sisters have confirmed the Sputnik vaccine is doing quite well. I don't hear the same thing about the Chinese one, but it is not completely ineffective. It is effective to some extent. I think 60% effective.
But it must be the cheapest one, though.
It is. You are quite right, because China is exercising its soft power with the vaccine, I know that Brazil got a lot of Chinese vaccine and it was not very effective, but it still did work. It was better than having nothing at all. India too makes some vaccines. Unfortunately for India, luckily, the vaccines are of reasonable quality. They're not the best in the world, but they are reasonable quality. The AstraZeneca and Pfizer one so far seems to be doing the best after Sputnik.
In Canada, actually, it's recognized that out of 3 vaccines which are approved, AstraZeneca, Moderna, and Pfizer. Pfizer is far the best one. Yes. Moderna coming second one, and AstraZeneca is no longer being offered to Canadians. It's now being, all the stockpiles are now being turned to some other countries or so on. It has
because they say that it causes clotting.
Yes, that's right. And, you know, in some people it affects, some people it doesn't affect. But you know, when you have available Moderna and Pfizer, who needs AstraZeneca?
Why take a risk? You know?
So yeah, that makes a lot of sense. One of the things I was curious about from both of y'all is right here in the United States, there's a lot of conversation about a couple of things that deal with higher education. One of them, of course, is the repaying of student loans and the forgiving of student loan debts. That's something that Biden has been tossing out there, and of course, they've been given different figures as to how much they'd be willing to forgive and for the time frame, like how far back you went to school and things of that nature. But the big thing that I'm really curious about is that here in the United States, there's been a shortage of restaurant workers because of the pandemic, and of course, folks are sometimes feeling that they can do more staying at home than they can actually working at the restaurants, even when they did work at the restaurants. As a matter of fact, I was reading an article earlier where a young boss, like one of those teenage bosses and everything, was complaining that he feels that a lot of his workers will be heading back to college, and so he's going to lose about half of his staff, and even some companies are using prison labor because of the claims of a worker shortage. So I was just wondering, is that the same thing in New Zealand, Canada, Russia, and Indonesia, some of the places that y'all have associations with, or is this a strictly American phenomenon with what's going on
it is.
with
It's
our
also
workers
there in
environment?
New Zealand. It is also there in New Zealand. There is, because of we used to have a floating population that used to come in, work, travel around the country, work, and then travel around the country. That population now has been cut off because of COVID. So it's the restaurant hospitality. They are suffering in terms of labor availability. So that is definitely an issue. But I think it is representative of something that is a larger malaise, that there is, like in the US, we have 10 families who dominate the New Zealand economy. And if democracies don't realize that economic freedom is also must go hand in hand with political freedom, then I'm afraid this thing is going to count against democracies. One of the I have never lived in a country like a communist country like China. I've lived in Hong Kong, and we've not made any overt statements against the government. Myself, being a foreigner, I didn't think it was my place to say so. And but I have many friends in Hong Kong who feel upset about the silencing. But I'm surprised that even in a country like India, you just criticize a minister and you put in jail. Today, a professor in a university in India made a criticism of one of the ministers who falsely claimed to have a degree, from Yale in the United States. She actually just went for some small program, and then she claimed that she had a degree from Yale. And so he criticized that, and he was put in jail. So you see, countries like India are now more repressive than a communist country like China, where you can criticize Xi Jinping as long as you don't put it on social media amongst your friends. As long as friends that you can trust, you can criticize the government. But in India, now that's not possible. If somebody sneaks on you, you had it.
Yes. Yeah, we're hearing
Hey,
a lot. Sorry about that, guys. I'm in and out
so,
today.
you're dealing with a lot, Steve. We understand. But I was actually going to ask about, and we brought them up a couple of times, but I was actually surprised when I read an article recently that King Lewan, who is apparently the wife of the Chinese president, has been very much speaking out on issues. And I've always thought that countries like that did not allow of a lot of those kind of conversations. But apparently at a forum on women's education and poverty, she was actually saying that the eliminating of poverty and the embracing of happiness are the common aspiration of all women. And by receiving education, knowledge, and skills, women can have the power to lift themselves out of poverty. So knowing what I know about China being a very much of a totalitarian government, when I read that statement, I was actually surprised that would even come out in the government of that particular country would allow those kind of conversations.
You can have those conversations, but I didn't take first of all, I felt it would be arrogant for me to who just states, so many years, and I don't really understand the political system in China. But I didn't see people unhappy. I visited China both Shanghai and Guangzhou and Shenzhen. I did not see people unhappy. I did not sense that everybody's will happen if they get a chance, grab a gun and shoot the local authorities. I did not get that sense. They were all quite comfortable. The McDonald's and the KFCs, etc., were being happily patronized. No animus towards the United States. They get upset when the warships are sent around that South China Sea. But even then, they're firmly on the side of their government. They're not, saying that we encourage the United States or the UK to send warships around the place. I think, first of all, in this day and age, when there are missiles that travel anywhere between 9 to 27 times the speed of sound, it is very stupid to have warships.
No, I hear you. And that makes a lot of sense. Hey, Steve, one of the things that she said almost sounds like something that we could hear some of our women activists here in America saying, because Ms. Ping said that reducing poverty through women's education will have a strong impetus if a country attaches great importance to it, social organizations actively support it, and people from all walks of life make selfless contributions. I could hear somebody in Morrisville saying that, or somebody just in politics in general saying something along that.
It is the truth, Mark. It is the truth. You can't have half a population subjugated. You've got to educate women. The logic, and I know this because I've taught both boys and girls, logic is gender independent. It's got nothing to do with your gender. So, if your logic is mathematics, science, everything, so if you want to have a productive population, you've got to have careers for women. You've got to, because a woman who's in a career will teach a child to be more confident, more assertive, and all that kind of thing. If you have the old model, and Asian countries are very guilty of this. They have the old model: woman should be subservient to the husband. That's changing. If you go in India, from the cities to the villages, I wouldn't say towns, because the towns are also having this change in mindset. You will find that you're moving through a time warp. And that too, in some areas, in certain states, the development has been so poor that when you go from the town or the city to the village, it's like you're moving in a time warp. You've gone back 100 years. So that is, it's hard to move a big ship like India. But China seems to have done it without a democracy, you see. So the Chinese people say, hey, this system works for us. I mean, I imagine that's what they're saying. I haven't really had a discussion, but I imagine that that's what they're saying. And when I talk to my wife, she seems to have the same opinion. So politically, I would say Chinese people are not stupid. If they find that communism works for them, they work with it. Nobody in this world, there are no secrets.
Speaking of no secrets, apparently,
everybody knows what is happening in other parts of the world, so nobody's ignorant.
So real quickly, I'm back, guys, for the remainder of the show. So real quickly, we've talked about the economic challenges, the foreign policy challenges of Biden, and while we're dealing this, we got in 24 hours the Olympics starting, and it has just been an absolute nightmare. I mean, athletes dropping out by every day. There's going to be no crowds in the opening ceremony. What are your thoughts about what we need to be doing with this in terms of
if we have to have these kind of things, first of all, I think we will need those COVID passports. If you want to run these things, and then I think the greater focus would be to improve the audiovisual transmission, the coverage of these facilities, to give the impression that you're actually there, so that and athletes will have to get used to the fact that they're not going to have cheering crowds, or maybe sound effects or something. I don't know.
Either that, or they can put up like they did in the early parts of the NBA. They can put up large mannequins and large cutouts and things of that nature, because that's some of the ways that they did in the NBA earlier. And I wanted to also find out from Sasha his thoughts about the Olympics, but I was going to add something to something that Rakesh said about the fact that there are no secrets in the world and everything, because one of the articles that I had seen was that the Danish military apparently says that it has spotted an Iranian destroyer and a large support vessel sailing through the Baltic Sea, and they were likely heading to Russia for a military parade in the coming days, because apparently there's an annual naval parade in St. Petersburg, so they're expecting that that's where they're heading for. So you're right, there's so many people looking at each other that you can't even go and attend a parade without folks knowing that you're heading over in that direction. So Sasha is one that used to live in Russia and also has some thoughts maybe about the Olympics. So what are your thoughts about both that as well as what Steve just brought up about the Olympic Games? And I was actually surprised that they were even going to try to hold them with knowing that the virus is still going on. But I know that that's such a unifying thing for people and their country pride, because a lot of people get caught up in hoping that their country wins, and it is definitely something that a lot of people get excited about, wanting to support whatever their nationality is. I know that even here in Durham, you'll find people that are of Brazilian descent rooting for their Brazilian team, and in some cases rooting against their Brazilian team because they don't like the country that they used to be from and all of that. I think I mentioned on a past news story that I had a friend that actually was rooting for Argentina because she finds Brazil to be a dictatorship as it is right now. So sometimes they are also rooting against their former country because they have certain issues within that country or not liking the way that it's being run.
I have the same problem with India. I don't like Modi. I love the country. I don't like the leader. That's all.
Yep. Your
um,
thoughts, Sasha?
okay, first of all, there are still few hours left to cancel all the Olympics. It's still possible. However, it's not going to be happening because essentially the only body that wins in Olympic Games, besides the gold winners, athletes and teams and so on, it's International Olympic Committee. It sells television rights all over the world, and 75% of income that it gets is from selling television rights. So the poor souls, such as Japan, and I learned yesterday that in 1932, in 2032, it will be Brisbane, Australia, who will have Olympic Games. What? Why are they doing that? They're losing tens of billions of dollars to say, "Oh, we have Olympic Games." Okay, good luck. You can have every month Olympic Games if you have enough money. That's really bizarre. It doesn't contribute to anything. I don't even believe that it unites people. I think it just make people angry at each other that his team lost and the other team. And even the sportsmen, what's a pleasure for them to sleep in this little cardboard beds when they cannot have sex? What's the big deal of all that? Okay, suppose there will be 150,000 condoms distributed that they will take home. That's why they would travel so far. It's ridiculous.
No,
I
you're
think
so right. It is so ridiculous. I do want to kick it back to Steve because even sometimes when we've had Olympic competitions, and I know that we had we've never had the Olympics in North Carolina, but we did have like the Olympic Games and some of the training programs in the past. And I remember that people were building some of those arenas for different sports, and in some cases there have been use of those facilities, but then there have been things that were built that were just kind of like left there because they were needed for the games during that time, like when we had the state games, and I forget the year. Steve, you can try to refresh my memory, but there were things built that were not able to be used, and maybe they've been converted, or maybe they're just sitting there empty. And I can only imagine that if that's in a microcosm, what it would look like in a macrocosm, where you've got these things that are built like, how often do you really use a ski jump and all of that, and some of the other facilities that they have to build in these kind of macrocosms, and then you do it in a country, and then it sits there empty with no real fundamental purpose. And like I said, I remember that we had those games sometime back in here in North Carolina. I think it was the state games or something, but it was Olympic oriented, and definitely there were things built. I think like some bicycle things as well as some other kind of sports that are not being used. I think there is a curling league here, so maybe they're still using the curling stadium and some of the other things. But I know they built things that were probably not being used to this day. But if I'm wrong, correct me.
Well, I think that whenever you build facilities and they're not used, it's not a good thing. But in where we live, a lot of the facilities that are built have been extensively used, and even after the pandemic, they're being used. I think what's very disappointing in this situation is the miscalculation of the Olympic organizers of the fact that they would have massive continued spread of COVID-19. I think that the Delta variant and the fact that it's more contagious is exposing more athletes to this who are getting infected, coming to Tokyo, and putting people at risk. Because if we're vaccinated and we wear a mask, we're okay. But if you're not vaccinated, now I would assume that most athletes would get vaccinated. So if they are vaccinated, like Coco Gauff, then how did she get COVID 19? That's one thing I don't understand. But typically, if you look at the other sports, whether it's NHL hockey, whether it's basketball, we just had the Milwaukee Bucks, the season tennis is back to normal, relatively speaking, with all the major Grand Slams. The golf, PGA Tour, how have they been able to have successful international sporting events? Wimbledon had people from all over the world coming to watch Novak Djokovic tie the all-time record. Um, so I don't understand what is going on with Tokyo. Is it that much worse in Tokyo? that it just was just, they should have just made a call and said it's too much of a risk. And now if you do, and then the problem is if you do cancel it, then what are you going to do with these Olympic facilities that you've built? I don't know.
I think the one thing they could have done is to decentralize the Olympics. So you have, maybe the Asian Olympics in Tokyo, the European Olympics in Istanbul, and African Olympics in some place in Africa, and Oceania, something in Australia. That kind of thing would at least limit spread. If at all there's spread, it would limit it to an area. And then you could sort of, just like you have, leagues, you could declare a champion who has the best record across the world, and you'd still have a gold medalist, but you would have facilities. I know that when the Asian Games were held in India, in Delhi, those facilities the housing for the athletes was used as a regular housing complex after that, and the sports facilities was used to train, and it really upped the level of training for athletes all over India. So I think it still gets used, but I think perhaps they could have thought of something like that. Just, I don't know, it's a crazy idea or not. I'm just
a great idea.
Hey, Steve, y'all were talking about the athletes, and I was actually thinking about this earlier and everything, but while that is a goal for some of our youth to get into the athletic world and even the entertainment world and things of that nature, a lot of times they don't do all that great in something that one of our founders talks about, which is financial literacy. So I was actually hearing, and this was before the pandemic, that last year, according to Sports Illustrated, 78% of the NFL players who were retired for only 2 years filed for bankruptcy. And after 5 years of retirement, 60% of the NBA players suffered the same fate. So that's a whole lot of folks that are making a lot of money. And I believe Allen Iverson last year was a case in point of somebody that has actually been declared broke, even though he earned at one point over 200 million in the NBA, and even more than that through sponsorship deals. So it's just a shame that a lot of these folks are not being taught about financial literacy and taught how to actually do what Sasha tries to get people to do on a regular basis: invest, and invest smartly in what they've got. Because these are some folks that have a tremendous amount of money and a tremendous amount of wealth. And I can pull up some other statistics, because it's not just the NFL and the NBA. Same thing exists in the NHL, Major League Soccer, Major League Baseball, and a number of other sports as well. And it's a global thing. So it's not just here in the United States, but I think that we'll even find that there have been some athletes, even internationally, that have done the same thing. They have suffered those broke kind of things as well. As a matter of fact, Diego Martino, the Argentinian soccer great, is another one that has been declared broke over time as well. So like I said, it's not just an American problem, it's an international problem.
Yeah, I can think of several Indians who had the same problem. Yeah.
It's very difficult to deal with this problem, because when they are at the height of their power and they're earning millions and millions of dollars, they're very cocky, and they feel that they don't need any advice. Furthermore, they can provide the advice. I remember at the time of dot-com boom, both Venus and Serena Williams, they were claiming to make so much money on stocks that they don't need tennis, they don't need anything, because they're just making millions and millions of dollars. But, a year later, after the crash, they became more modest and became back to tennis tournaments or so on. So all the sportsmen, by the time they blow away all their money and they are penniless, now it's too late to provide them any advice, because it's impossible to cure the situation where they are. And actually, their situation is much, much worse than people who were poor all their lives, because they already have taste of a great living, and they crave for expensive cars and a great lifestyle, but it's no longer available to them and never will be. That's a tragedy.
Yep.
The pendulum has started to swing in New Zealand as far as interest rates are. Interest rates have started moving up in New Zealand. So mortgages will get more expensive. and it is something which the Reserve Bank of New Zealand started up because houses were getting into very, very crazy price levels. The price levels started leveling off. They're not rising as fast as they did in the past. But I think this is now a trend that will happen globally, because real estate, safe as houses doesn't have to mean that you have such a low interest rate, because it overextends people.
Guys, we got to close out. Ready for closeout, Mark?
I'm ready for close. I was actually getting ready to kick it to you because he brought up a good point, which is about housing and real estate, and definitely apartment rents are going up here as well. I mean, I know some people that are paying, and this is in North Carolina, paying anywhere from like $1,500 to $2,000 for some relatively modest apartments, and even $1,000 a month. And yes, there are people that are forgiven their debts right now, but as we all know, just because it's being forgiven this particular month, that doesn't mean that you don't have to pay it back eventually. So say we've been in an 18-month crisis, if that's 18 times 1,000, then they may come after you for about $18,000 eventually, depending on how they handle what's going on. So on that note, and we may talk about this later, I'm going to toss it over to our masterful person that puts on this whole event, which is Steve Rouse. So Steve, it's back to you and your closing remarks. You don't have anybody to jab at today because Shaquille isn't here. So I don't know if you want to jab at Sasha, because Sasha got a mean right hook and he might get you back.
Well, tonight is a big event for me personally. I celebrate my decade of service as a public official. It just seems like the other day on 2011, November, when I was standing with my late father-in-law at the polls as election returns closed. And he always denied it, but I felt the small trickle of his tears in his eyes when he gave me a hug, and history was made as I became the first Indian American elected in North Carolina history. After 10 years, I'm proud to say that we have a state senator, Jay Chaudhry, a minority whip, my colleague Satish Garamella, an immigrant from Mumbai, Dimple Ajmera, an immigrant from India who serves on Charlotte City Council, and we have Hong Bin Gu, who's running for the mayor of Chapel Hill. It's been amazing to sometimes step back and look at all the different things that we've achieved. I took a 10-mile run last week, and I saw all the things that occurred in Morrisville that hadn't existed when I was sworn in. The Church Street Park, the Northwest Park, our fitness center, I could go on and on. But it got me thinking, what I like about city politics is that you can actually get things done. It's the last place in our government, in our democracy, where it doesn't matter whether Republican or Democrat, or it shouldn't matter. What matters is you work with engaged citizens, you execute a vision, you work with your staff, and you can actually show progress. Sometimes in the wee hours of the night, I talk to Senator Jay Chaudhry. The grass is always greener on the other side. He's now the minority whip of the Senate, leading the Democratic caucus. But he often jokes with me that, Steve, if I could only be a city councilman for just a few hours, if I could only see the results of my work, because being in the minority party, I cannot. I want to thank Senator JC for sometimes reminding me that these are the things that matter, making a difference. It was, as Al Pacino said in the movie City Hall, he quoted Pericles. And he said that all good things, great things, all good things flow into the city because of the city's greatness. Pericles was the mayor of Athens 2,500 years ago. Are we still envisioning that, like the Greek city-state? I believe that cities can make things happen. And hopefully after this pandemic, whether we're in Toronto, the capital of New Zealand, and I don't know the capital of New Zealand, or any capital of the city, and thought like I have homework to do, that we can make a difference. So thank you for letting me be a part of this, and I look forward to seeing each and every one of you very soon tomorrow.
I'm going to test my trivia, and Rakesh can correct me as I'm getting ready to hit that magic button with the images and everything. I think the capital of New Zealand is Auckland. Am I correct?
No, it's Wellington.
No, I was wrong. I admit when I'm wrong.
It was Auckland.
Have a great day, and I'll see you all tomorrow.
To Wellington. Yeah.
Okay, cool. Appreciate it. I've learned something new, and we're getting ready to get on out of here. Oops, that's not what I wanted. Hold on.